It's another brilliant fall day in the San Juan Mountains. We are here in Hinsdale County, outside of Lake City, Colorado, at the Ute Ulay Mine and Mill Complex to talk about the milling process involved in hard rock mining and metal production. Hinsdale County acquired the majority of the Ute Ulay complex in recent years in an effort to protect this historic landmark and to preserve our mining heritage. Like most Colorado mines, the Ute Ulay survived on many different cycles of boom and bust. But in a somewhat unique circumstance, the mill enjoyed a more recent revival when in the 1990s, ore from the nearby Golden Wonder was processed here prior to shipment. While certain upgrades have been made in equipment and technologies, the basic milling process undertaken during this recent activity was very much the same as the techniques of the previous century. Knowledge of milling equipment and processes is limited as hard rock mining is becoming increasingly less economically feasible. But we're fortunate to have one of the miners who was involved in the recent milling activity at the Ute Ulay Mill, and he has agreed to walk us through the process. Matt Ingram is back in Lake City for the world-famous Wine and Music Festival, and is here with us at some of his old haunts at the Ute Ulay Mill. Thanks a lot for being with us, Matt.
With us? You're welcome.
Hey, if you could just introduce yourself, say what mines you worked in this area, when the mill was operating, and stuff like that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm Matt Ingram. Moved out here in the early 90s. Worked at the Golden Wonder Mine, this Ute Ulay Mill site, Champion Mine over on Cinnamon Pass, a couple mines in the Uray area, and a couple mines out in California. Pretty much everything gold mining though. And what we were doing here at the Ute in 94, 96 thereabouts was milling ore from the Golden Wonder. Golden Wonder Mining Company was doing a lot of revamping and exploration and mining at the Golden Wonder, and they would bring their ore from the 6 levels of the Golden Wonder and the 3 levels up here and stack it on this pad out here that you can see. From there, the ore would be put into this coarse ore bin, which has seen better days. But anything that wouldn't go through the grizzly, they had to beat to death with a sledgehammer to get it on to fit. And it would go down to this coarse ore bin and wait for crushing. And we'll go inside and I'll show you the crusher room. It's been, everything's been taken out of it, but you can kind of see what happened there, where they crushed the ore down to a finer size and went into the fine ore bin before it was further processed in the ball mill and the flotation cells.
Can you kind of explain a little bit how the crusher room works?
Sure. At the very far end of that conveyor belt down there is a feed conveyor which would slowly feed the coarse ore onto that other belt. That belt then fed a large jaw crusher which would break the large rocks into material about 4 inches or less, maybe 3 inches or less. That then went into a cone crusher, a screen and then a cone crusher, which would get the rock to about 1/2 inch to maybe 1 inch in size, and that would be called fine ore at that point. There's also a lot of fines mixed in it that happen from the crushing process and from blasting. And then it gets carried up into the fine ore bin with that scoop conveyor, where it's ready to feed the ball mill, which is just behind us.
So we're at the top of the scoop conveyor, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the shovel conveyor would take the crushed ore and bring it up and then fill this fine ore bin that we're standing above.
And that fine ore bin is huge, right?
It's huge, and there's probably still ore in it from the Golden Wonder.
For the ball mill,
there's a belt drive that runs back, kind of hard to see back there, but it's a 50 horsepower motor on a pretty large belt, 10-inch wide belt, almost 50 feet long. And it would spin this flywheel in front of us, which also has a clutch attached to it. pretty hard to get that big ball mill started moving, but once you get it moving, it was very easy.
So the ball mill is just a big cylinder with those big metal balls, just
Correct.
crushing it up.
Like a giant rock tumbler, but it beats stuff to death into a pulp. During the grinding and crushing process, chemicals are added to the ore, xanthates in particular, which will help float the minerals out of the material. Methyl isobutyl carbonyl is one of the flotation chemicals. It helps to make a nice froth, and pine oil helps to make a nice froth. And then the xanthates and metallics would attach to that and come up in a small bubble.
And sorry, Matt, what did you call this machine again? The screw?
A screw classifier. It takes anything that's still too coarse for flotation and feeds it back to the ball mill.
Okay, let me just try to get a little light on this. That's the ball mill motor back there. Here is the belt drive that Matt was talking about, the clutch, and this tumbler that you see with the gears on it right there, that's the actual ball mill right there. And then coming on down here you can see one of the conditioners, and then of course this is the screw classifier. Hopefully that light gives you a little bit better view of things there. So this is kind of a confined space, but I wanted to show you, this is where the fine ore bin conveys the fine ore up to the ball mill. And then you can actually see here in this bin, this is where some of the actual balls are. These are the balls that go in to the ball mill. Now some of these are fairly new. You can see it's still got ribs on it, but then some of these are just worn down to almost near nothing. And then just trying to shed a little light on things. This is, again, this is the fine ore bin and the conveyor to the ball mill, which is this big drum right here. And then directly adjacent is the screw classifier, which would classify the size of the particles so that the particles that were still too big would be brought back up to the ball mill for further crushing.
Down here we have a conditioner, which is a pre-treatment tank basically. It's constantly being agitated, and you can add chemicals here and get a little more contact time for the chemicals with the metallics before they actually hit the flotation cells. We've got 2 banks of flotation cells to try and get the best recovery, but the froth that would float up to the top carrying the metallics would be skimmed off with these wipers.
And skimmed into the trough here?
Skimmed into the trough here, where it could eventually be cleaned a couple times to try and reduce the amount of waste with it and upgrade the quality of the concentrate. And chemicals were added in. 3501 is a xanthate, and 350 is a xanthate. And those are all used to help draw the metals up with the froth. These last 2 cells are cleaner cells, which should basically produce your final product. A very wet final product at this stage.
I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, but the flotation is kind of the heart of the whole milling process. The ore is pulverized so that the metal particles are small enough that when combined with the proper chemicals and agitation will float to the top in a kind of froth that is then scraped from the surface.
Or did they
Over on
operate?
this side, we'd take the waste material and run it through again and try and pull out anything that we missed on the first go around. All the stuff from the cleaner on this bank of float cells would go back in over here to give it another chance to get pulled.
And was there any difference in the chemicals that you would add on this side of the recovery system?
Generally, we didn't add any at this point.
Okay.
Very little would come down this, just to, if it needed a boost.
And then once we had our final product here, how would it, did you just scoop it out, or was
From here, there's plenty of water with it, and it would go into this big tank behind us, which would continually agitate, but also try and thicken it. And then from there, it would get pumped over to, well, we'll go around and look at it, and you'll be able to see it. It's a big filter. That filter would rotate and suck the water out of the material, and the actual concentrate would get scraped off of it and fall down into a drying tube. Watch your head on this pipe. I don't know how many times I've hit it, even with the paint job. Compressed air would blow these filter bags out, and then they would be cleaned as they got scraped around on these rubber mats, which have seen better days. Then, once it went back down into the material, a vacuum compressor would suck the water and the material back onto these filter bags.
And then it was on the filter bags where it would dry out.
That would draw as much water as it could out of it as it was going around. It rotated this way, and by the time it got to the other end, it was more like a mud that got scraped off.
Uh-huh.
And let's see if it's still here. We'll have to go downstairs to look at it.
But the scrapings would then, by gravity, fall down below?
Yeah, the scrapings went down there where they were fed into a long rotating cylinder that had a propane torch shooting up in it to heat the stuff up and help dry it out quicker. Here you can see where the concentrates would come down into the drying tube and then go back out here into the concentrate bin where they were scooped off and shipped to wherever they were going to be refined.
And the concentrate bin is just this concrete area?
Yes.
Down below? And then would you bag it or throw it in
It
a
was
truck?
usually put directly into 55-gallon drums.
Uh-huh. And then from here it would go to the smelter?
The smelter would
Okay.
take it from there. And they're the ones that actually get to see the gold.
And so do you recall what smelters you guys used at this?
I don't, but there was one running up in Montana at the time, and it was probably sent up there. I think that was the only one in the United States at the time. So.
Now, did the ore from the Golden Wonder go through this entire process?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and I think now they're sending their coarse ore to another facility.
It's shipped to another mill.
Uh-huh.
Used to be up in Washington, but they're shut down now. So
Right.
currently there's no mining going on in the area. Over here, behind Jack, is the pump that handled the waste material. Almost everything that we put through this mill is waste material, and that had to be dealt with, and this is where the pump that would pump it back up and send it into the adit and back to fill the old stope underground.
And is that kind of a modern technique that...
It's becoming pretty popular.
Right.
Just put it back. They do it a lot better than we were doing it nowadays. They'll often mix it with concrete and just completely fill the stopes back in underground with hard material. Just like putting an eraser underground.
Right.
And just erasing all the work they did so they can work somewhere else.
But back in the 1800s, they were essentially just pumping it out.
They would dump it out into a pond.
A pond.
Somewhere. Make a big pile.
Nice.
You want to take a look at the Buckeye?
Yeah, you got time?
Sure. Through this little tunnel to this room is the power plant for everything that we did up here. It's a 5-cylinder diesel engine that I'm small enough where I could stand inside of one of the cylinders.
Wow.
Where these open plates are the diesel injectors.
So Matt, remind me again, it was in the 93, 94 this thing was running.
Yes. And then right here on the end is the actual generator. It would make about 250 kilowatts in its best day. Now one day up here there was a loud boom, and on the other side of this thing is a water-cooled exhaust. Enough scale got inside of this exhaust, the water cooling portion of it, that eventually could not handle it and split in half right in the middle. And that was the last day that the Buckeye's been run. A huge cloud of smoke came out of here and we shut down for a little while until we were able to get a modern generator. These things have been used on ships, submarines, and any other place where they needed large power.
So other than the cooling system, I mean, this is pretty intact.
This could be fired up again with a little bit of work. You used compressed air to get it to turn over the first time.
Oh yeah? The starter was compressed air?
Compressed air, and you stick a little iron bar in there and jump up and grab a hold of it to give that thing a little boost.
Like a crank start.
Yep. But this is quite a piece of machinery.
So just as a quick review, the ore came from the mine. You can see the adit here. Or in the case of the more recent activity, the ore from the Golden Wonder was staged kind of outside the mill at this little kind of landing. Then the ore was taken to the top of the coarse ore bin, where it was essentially pounded through what is known as the grizzly, which is just essentially a big metal grate here, and then forced down into the coarse ore bin. Then here in the crushing room at the far end is the coarse ore bin. The ore would go through a jaw crusher and then a cone crusher, and then onto this conveyor that took it to this vertical conveyor, this scoop or bucket conveyor that would take the ore up into the fine ore bin. And then here is the scoop or bucket conveyor that would bring the ore from the crushing room up to the top of the fine ore bin and dump the ore down into the fine ore bin. Then from the fine ore bin, the conveyor would bring it up here to the feeder for the ball mill, which is this big drum here that you can see. the ball mill would pulverize the ore into a pulp. It would go into this screw classifier, which would ensure that the pulp was properly pulverized and bring particles that were too large back up to the ball mill for further processing. From there it would go into the conditioner. This is where the agitator mixed together some chemicals prior to moving over here to the froth flotation cells. This is where the metal particles would bind with the xanthates and the froth to be scooped off the top and into this trough. The other bank here was for secondary recovery, I think sometimes called the scavenger bank, for further processing. After the concentrate was gathered, it would be washed into this little hole and over to another mixer agitator that would thicken the pulp prior to the filtration process. The filter would filter the pulp and essentially attempt to de-water as much as possible the concentrates prior to then dumping them down below the filters to where the final drying process took place. And then this is where the concentrates came down into the drying tube, essentially a propane fired tube, to where the concentrate bin, and this is where the concentrates would be loaded up and gotten ready to head to the smelter.
As mentioned at the outset, the Ute Ulay property was acquired by Hinsdale County in an effort to protect this historical landmark and to preserve our mining heritage. Hinsdale County has been participating in a unique partnership with a local mining company, local nonprofit organizations, and state and federal agencies to make this site suitable as a heritage tourism destination. A great deal of work has been accomplished to date: environmental mitigation of the waste rock and tailings dumps, sealing dangerous shafts, stopes, and adits, interior work on lead paint and asbestos hazards, and emergency stabilization of some of the historic buildings. Work is continuing, and one of the focuses is stabilizing the historical structures comprising the site. Hinsdale County has been able to leverage its resources through grants, but there is still a significant gap in funding. Private donations could go a long way in helping Hinsdale County preserve this important historical landmark. Donations may be made by following the link on the lower right-hand side of Hinsdale County's homepage. The title is the Ute Ulay Restoration Project. Thanks for watching. We hope you learned something about the ore milling process, and please consider making a donation to the Ute Ulay Restoration Project.